prepared for this climate change, which clearly is occurring, Texas would not be having this problem. To which you say?
Well, let's just say that if we did more of what they wanted us to do, our grid would have had a complete collapse, and far more people would have suffered and lost their lives. Ask yourself this question: would the situation in Texas on Sunday night and Monday morning, when temperatures dropped very quickly, would they have been made better or worse if we had 1,000 more wind turbines and one fewer coal-fired power plant? And, the answer is obvious, right? Things would have been far worse because the wind turbines, many of them had frozen up because of the freezing rain. Now, we weren't going to rely on that much power from wind that night anyway. The projections were that it was only going to contribute a very small amount of the power, as I recall, somewhere around 3,000 megawatts or less. But that power output was cut even in half. Imagine if we relied even more on wind and we had decommissioned even more gas and coal-fired power plants. We've gotten rid of 3,000 megawatts of net power from more reliable thermal power plants in the last 5 years, while adding 20,000 megawatts of installed wind and solar. So we're pretty much doing what California is doing, only where California is going big on solar, Texas is going big on wind.
Chuck, why is Texas doing this in the first place? I thought Texas was anti-windmills, anti-solar. Why did Texas do this in the first place?
Because people can make a lot of money on it because of the federal subsidies, and unfortunately, Texas loves to provide corporate welfare to different types of companies, and wind power is among them. They get property tax abatements when they build their wind farms. And so a lot of these wind farms are owned by foreign companies, often even foreign governments. We have a wind farm that's owned by the French government that provides power here. And they make billions of dollars of tax breaks and subsidies. And Larry, what that does in Texas's market, which is a free market when it comes to the wholesale generation of electricity, what that does is it drives down the price of power for much of the year when wind is producing, frequently at night when it's not as much needed. And it prevents people who want to invest in new gas-powered power plants or keep existing coal plants in operation. It prevents them from making money off of those operations. And so they don't build them or they decommission them early because wind and solar are undercutting them. But the problem is that wind and solar can't be relied upon to produce power when you need it. And so what ends up happening is that the very power plants that are the reliable ones that rescue us in these times are the very ones that are being put out of business by the predatory low prices from wind and solar. And what we think they should do is force wind and solar to have to pay for the backup rather than socializing the costs to the ratepayers to the tune of billions and billions of dollars, which will only get more as wind and solar penetrate further into the market. And so what that would entail is they should build huge battery farms and have that as part of the price of wind and solar power. That, or they need to contract with a reliable gas-fired power plant that will just sit around unused when it's windy, but as soon as the wind dies down or an ice storm comes, it would kick in and it would operate and make sure that people don't freeze to death.
My guest is Chuck.
But that's what's happening.
My guest is Chuck DeVore, VP of National Initiatives with the Texas Public Policy Foundation. Chuck, a few more questions. Are you saying the analogy is the analogy to ethanol, but for all these tax incentives and breaks and all these subsidies, that industry wouldn't exist? You guys never would have built these wind turbines had it not been for these incentives that distort the marketplace?
It's half of the equation. The other half of the equation is that when grids were first built out in America, all the power that provided energy to them were more or less reliable forms of power. And so we've never adequately addressed how do you price in for reliability and resiliency? How do you honor or give a credit for energy that's there when you need it in a reliable fashion rather than being dependent upon nature, upon weather? And so we need to solve that problem, and we got to solve it quickly because every year that goes by, these subsidies inevitably cause the building of more wind turbines in Texas and more solar power farms. I see the huge blades. I mean, they're as big as a 737 wing going by on the highway all the time.
We have just a couple of minutes left. A couple more things. I also have heard on CNN, MSNBC, Hee-Haw, that Texas divorced itself from the national grid. Texas is an island all to itself, and had Texas not done that, wouldn't be having the problems. Respond to that.
Well, Texas was the very first state to have a grid to provide power to the industries in World War II down along the coast. And because Texas is a very big place, about 90% of Texas is serviced by its own grid. Now, one of the things that it provides Texas that's very attractive to Texas is that prevents the federal government from regulating us with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, because we don't have any interstate commerce in our electrons, right? No, there's no electricity going across state boundaries, which allows us to operate our grid free from the prying interference of the Biden administration.
Finally, Chuck, I've got to ask you this. Tell me that CNN, MSNBC has called you and asked you to come on as a guest to explain what's going on in Texas?
Well, I think that I might disrupt their narrative. So
honestly,
they want to.
All I'm hearing are people that are echoing the theme. There's nobody I've seen that says, "Well, now wait a second. It's a little more complicated than that." And you explain things very simply and very well. I'm amazed they have. I shouldn't say I'm amazed. It doesn't surprise me they haven't called you, but they ought to if they want to be truly fair and balanced.
Well, I don't think that's what their objective is.
I think
they have a partisan objective, and they're focused on it.
I think you're right. I think that's their marketing agenda. That's their business plan, and they're sticking to it. Chuck DeVore, thank you very much for coming on. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Anytime.
You got it. 888-971-SAGE, 888-971-7243.